Each morning, long before any visitors, the animals call out, claiming territories in a man-made landscape thousands of miles from their ancestral homes. Today, there are more than 5 billion people on Earth. Never have we humans exercised such dominion over nature, nor been so removed from it. And yet we still wonder at living things. We know we are part of nature. Our animal past flows through our minds and bodies. And so, living in cities, we make zoos. And in searching for connections to wild creatures, we cage them.
That was nice. Good boy, Herc.
It seems the more urbanized we've become, the more we long for some remembered or imagined contact with wild animals. Each year, more people in the United States visit zoos than attend the arenas and stadiums of all the major professional sports teams combined. In the heart of the nation's capital, the Smithsonian's National Zoo has been welcoming visitors for over a century. Why do they come to the zoo? What do we expect to find by looking at the animals?
How's the lion go?
Hey, you're cute. I think they're friends, really. What do you think?
Come on. Come on. Oh, yes. You're a beautiful girl. Yes, you are. Yes. It's your dad. Your dad. Isn't she beautiful? Do you like those legs?
Looks like a red fox almost.
I think she looks like a can-can dancer in black stockings.
The park's 8th director, Dr. Michael Robinson, combines the qualities of an administrator, fundraiser, research scientist, and plain old animal fancier.
Knows me, and when there's nobody around,
Do you go in there?
No. She's still a wild animal.
My feeling is that as a species, we humans have spent 99% of our existence as hunters and gatherers. And we've been very, very close to nature. 1 million years doing that and only 10,000 civilized. And that made us really dependent on animals and plants in many ways. And I think we have built into our innate behavior a response to animals.
All of us feel a profound need to connect with animals, to affirm some bond shrouded in the deep evolutionary past. It is as if we were searching for kindred spirits, contemplating some hidden, elusive part of ourselves.
Try a hoot.
Say something, bird. Moves his head when I do that, John.
He's watching you.
If I could be any animal in the zoo, I think I would be the giraffe.
I like to be an elephant. I like to be a monkey.
Why?
Because I like monkeys.
I'd like to be a crocodile, I think, because they get to sleep in the water all day.
Probably a pretty bird, an elegant bird.
Probably a cheetah. but I like to run fast. A zebra.
Probably a bear.
My favorite animal is the polar bear.
Why?
Well, because he's not indigenous to this area. He's usually pure white and is able to take care of himself when the need arises.
I think a bald eagle.
A lion. Cockroach.
I think one of the problems about wild creatures is that we never really see them as wild creatures living in the real world. We look upon them as projections of ourselves and our friends, and we anthropomorphize about animals. And that's a tragic error in many ways. You get to a stage of identification with them that can be completely misleading. One of the explanations is that certain animals have facial proportions that are pleasing to a large number of human beings.
I got a teddy bear just like this.
It's a theory of Konrad Lorenz's, the famous Austrian ethologist, that animals that roughly have the same proportions of facial dimensions as human babies elicit a kind of parenting response in humans. That means a high forehead, large eyes, and a very short nose. And pandas in particular are perfect. But pandas, which seem to be benign, gentle creatures, are actually very savage and very solitary and very aggressive.
He's okay. You won't have to back up.
Did he buy you?
I think that zoos have part of their attraction to people in a kind of reversion to our original curiosity about the natural world.
It loves you.
But I think that curiosity had enormous survival value. It was our aboriginal biology.
Our earliest connections to animals were magical, embodying primordial hopes and fears, messages and promises. Animals once stood at the center of our world, their existence intimately tied to ours. No society of hunter-gatherers ever collected and displayed wild animals in zoos. The first zoos coincide with the beginnings of the great ancient civilizations. They were created for the pleasure of kings, queens, emperors, and pharaohs.
They seem to have been symbols of imperial power, of domination over the animal world. If you can have in your court a giant elephant, then you are really showing some kind of extraordinary power. It's like having 4 or 5 Rolls Royces in your driveway nowadays.
The might and power of the Persian emperor was celebrated in a zoo called a Paradisos, from which the biblical Garden of Eden takes its name, paradise. And God blessed them, saying, "Fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every living thing that moves upon the earth."
The attitude that human beings are a distinct creation and separate from the rest of the animal kingdom, on a pinnacle, lower than the angels but higher than the animals, can lead in a naive way to an attitude towards animals that they are so different that we can exploit them, we can subject them to privations, we can be cruel to them, and it's not as if we were dealing with something with an immortal soul or some prospect of salvation, and therefore they can be used.
The great public zoos of the 19th century were founded just as animals began to disappear from everyday life. Zoos advertised themselves as institutions for scientific observation and public instruction. But whatever the intentions, they continued to demonstrate man's superiority over the brute beasts.
One of the early 19th century drives in almost every kind of public exhibition facility was to have as many different kinds of things as you could possibly accumulate. And early zoos reflected that kind of art gallery approach. You'd have one lion, one tiger, one brown bear, one black bear. And it was essentially a series of masterpieces hung in frames of steel, you know, the penitentiary collectionist approach.
Habitat zoos were a late 19th century innovation. Separated from the visitor by deep moats, wild animals roamed freely in simulated habitats that suggested the powerful link between the animals and the natural world from which they had been removed. No more cages, no more bars. The Habitat Zoo became the model for our own zoos today.
Habitat zoos gave the public the impression that they were seeing life in the wild, but it was partly window dressing. And even now, we still build exhibits that look right to human visitors and aren't necessarily a reflection of the kind of world in which the animal itself lives.
We really should be regarding them as separate species entitled to their own lives, and that's what good zoos are trying to do, to give them conditions in which their own lives can be fully realized.
But can a wild animal's life ever be fully realized within the confines of a zoo? People who work in zoos know how easily that ancient repertory of behavior can be stunted by concerned but nonetheless human care. Can a wild animal remain wild, living in a man-made home?
Say hi to those guys.
Nancy is 35 years old and has lived in a zoo since she was a calf. For 14 years, she lived alone, which is very difficult for a female elephant. John Lenhart helped change all that.
In the wild, elephants have a social hierarchy. The females live in social groups all their lives. The males...
John Lenhart is in charge of the elephant house. He has lived among elephants for 13 years.
After that. The females, however, are social animals.
Elephants, like other intelligent mammals with complex behaviors, don't easily adjust to life in the zoo. The zoo must study them carefully to find outlets for their natural behavior.
When we moved Nancy in with this group, we suspected she would be a dominant animal because her personality is so strong. But she's just taken over this herd.
After just 10 months in the elephant family, through sheer physical intimidation, Nancy has become the matriarch.
Our elephants are lined up and are walking. Our first elephant in line is Nancy. In the middle, we have Shanti.
Every morning, the elephants give a performance that, to an outsider, might smack of Barnum and Bailey. But to zoo people, is a demonstration of their care.
It's not easy to give a medical exam to an elephant. Since elephants have very sensitive skin, this is how we check their skin for scrapes and cuts. Every day, the keepers check their feet for cracks and rocks embedded in their pads.